This video is about the hype surrounding Deion Sanders specifically, and the Colorado Buffaloes generally, the mainstream media, who are falling all over themselves. And I'm trying to find a way to say this that's not adult in nature. This is about the mainstream media and even some Nebraska fans. It's sad that I see some Nebraska fans falling for this. But servicing a grown man, and by extension the grown men on his team, it's embarrassing, it's shocking, it's weird, and it's gross. Watching the mainstream media craft a narrative about Deion, the great savior of college football, without Deion, apparently without Deion, college football wouldn't exist. I've heard that Deion Sanders is now the new face of college football. He's doing something totally revolutionary, no one's ever done before. That somehow college football is going to change. The old guards have to just throw everything out the window and take a page from Deion Sanders' playbook if they're going to win. If they're going to beat Colorado, if they're going to stop Colorado from being a multi-generational, year after year favorite to win the national championship and have 3 or 4 players win the Heisman at the same time, college football is going to have to throw out the old and get with the new, and that's Deion Sanders. It's ridiculous, it's embarrassing, and it's just flatly incorrect. And so I want to go over a couple of those points with you now. First point I want to make to you about the Deion hype train is that the idea that what he's doing right now with his roster being revolutionary, that is absolute nonsense. It's poppycock, it's bogus, it's not just a myth, it's just flatly 100% not true. Now you may say, wait a second, didn't Deion come in and clean out his roster? Oh yeah, well, he cleaned out his roster in exactly the same way every other team across the country is having to clean out their rosters. Now there's a caveat to that, and I'll get to the caveat in a moment. But for an example, if you're a Nebraska fan, the entire starting lineup for Nebraska's offense, with the exception of 1 or 2 players, is different this year. Defense is much the same. All across college football, teams are having massive turnover year over year. In fact, 2023 is the greatest turnover we've seen since the transfer portal was instituted. So what Deion is doing is nothing more than every other team is doing, with one exception. He cleaned out the entire roster. Well, now let's think about that for a moment. Number one, he had to do that because when your team, of which you're not the coach, the year before is worst across all college football in every category. When you're not just bad for your team, but historically bad in college football, it probably makes sense to start over from scratch. But here's an important point I want you to remember. It's not going to happen that way next year. The revolution that Deion Sanders started in 2023 is not going to spill over into 2024. He's not going to do this again next year. He's going to stick with a lot of the players, most of the players. And if you listen to Deion, they're all so fantastic, except for graduating seniors, he'll keep everybody. And so the idea that Deion is doing something really revolutionary, it's just not true. Every single team is doing exactly the same thing that Deion's doing. The only difference is Deion started from the worst possible situation, and he did what every other coach would have probably have done in his shoes. Okay, now let's talk about the myth about Deion Sanders, the winner. And yes, I said myth. Everywhere you go in the mainstream media, there's this story now that wherever Deion goes, success follows. I mean, and no one ever questions this. It happened to him in college, it happened to him in the pros, it was baseball, it was at Jackson State. Gosh, what a record of success. Everyone should be so lucky to have been on a team with Deion Sanders. Here's the truth. In college, he joined an FSU team that was already loaded, was a winner many years before he got there, and had a better record and stronger teams after he left. Was it good when he was there? Yeah, it would have been good without him. When he went to the pros, he went to the Falcons. The Falcons were a disaster. They were horrible. They were terrible. And with the Falcons and the 49ers and the Cowboys, which I'll get to those teams specifically, and the Redskins and the Ravens, nobody ever talks about the Redskins and the Ravens or the Falcons. The only thing people talk about are the 49ers and the Cowboys. Teams which are already dynasties, already multi-year, multi-decade winning franchises that Deion came to for a year or two. In the case of the 49ers, 1 year, picked up a Super Bowl they would have won without Deion. And went to the Cowboys and did the same thing. And this is not the same thing as being a difference maker or having success follow you everywhere you go. This is the case of a guy who cherry-picked a situation in San Francisco and in Dallas and went to already proven, already multi-decade, as I said, franchises, already expected to win Super Bowls, which they did, and they would have won with or without him. Overall, what was his record in the pros, in the NFL? The teams that Deion played on, and go look it up yourself if you want to, had an overall win-loss record of exactly 50%. 112 wins and 112 losses. That's not success following you everywhere you go. That is the definition of mediocrity. That is if you're going to credit Deion with somehow being a part of some amazing success as a pro football player. You'll notice no one talks about the Ravens, no one talks about the Redskins, and no one talks about the Falcons. There's a reason for that, because those years and those teams bookend a couple Super Bowls with teams already expected to win, and they did what they would have done with or without Deion. Okay, next, his record with Major League Baseball. Once again, please don't just cherry pick a World Series with the Braves. Don't cherry pick the couple Braves years that were really good. Look at his time with the Yankees and with the Reds. If you include all Major League Baseball all of his Major League Baseball record, the teams he was on, 54% wins. So including Major League Baseball and college football, about 52% total wins, something like that. And with 3 teams out of all of the teams he was on and all the years he played being remarkable in any way. Jackson State is interesting for a couple reasons. Number one, he went to Jackson State, turned in a couple years there of fantastic coaching, fantastic play. You cannot argue with his record at Jackson State as a coach, and I don't. What I will argue is that translating from Jackson State to Colorado, and we've seen one game, but translating 2 seasons at Jackson State to major college football with, a much broader scope of teams with longer histories and pedigrees of winning national championships. Well, we know that what you do at a smaller school doesn't always translate to a larger school because of what we saw with Scott Frost. Now, before you say to me that Deion and Scott Frost aren't the same, yeah, I'm not saying they are. But before we credit him for what happened at Jackson State, which I do credit for what happened at Jackson State, but before we credit that translating to what's going to happen at Colorado, let's give it more than one game. Winning didn't really happen academically or sports-wise at Prime Prep. And not only did it not happen at Prime Prep was an absolute flame-out. It was financially, it was academically, and absolute tank jobs. But even more so, do yourself a favor, listen to the audio of what Deion was saying. And listen to the racial epithets, the racial slurs, the threats against people, the N-bombs being dropped. It's pretty spectacular. And the reason I bring it up is not to point out another obvious, forgotten truth about Deion Sanders that's not really part of the Deion myth. The reason I bring it up is this. I can't think of any coach, if you listen to what you'll hear Deion say in the audio, I can't think of another coach who could have gotten away with what Deion said, what he admittedly did, or what was alleged to have done, and be getting any hires right now in college football. Don't take anything I say as the truth on this. Go read the articles, listen to the article yourself, listen to the audio The next is this "no one believed us" narrative. This is one which is preposterous. Don't even have to go deep on this one. Deion always talks about, or likes to talk about, and likes to goad reporters into admitting they didn't believe and no one believed, and there was, do you believe now? He's got the receipts, and calling people out for what they didn't believe. Look, number one, it's not that people didn't believe, it's that no one believed, because in all of college football, it's not easy to come in from ground zero and just start racking up wins. I mean, I didn't hear anybody say there's no chance Deion's got to be a college football head coach, because here's the deal. Everybody wanted a piece of Deion before Colorado got him. It was the hottest ticket in town. Are we like goldfish till we don't have memories that go back the last 30 seconds to not remember the day after day after day Deion sweepstakes? All the teams supposedly lined up to take Deion as their next head coach. The media falling all over him again before he went to Colorado. The idea that no one believed is ridiculous. We know that lots of people believed, lots of people wanted him to come in and be their coach, and Colorado took him. So the only thing that people didn't believe necessarily was that the team would do, well, what he keeps saying the team's going to do, which is just win. And win apparently every week. That's the goal. And I am one, I'll admit to you, that don't believe he's going to win every week. I don't think Colorado's going to win the national championship. I don't think they're going to the national championship. I don't even know if they'll have a winning record this year. It's not whether I believe in Deion, it's that in the entirety of the history of all sports, it's just very difficult to do. Now, that takes me to the first game of the season against TCU. The TCU victory shocker story. Again, I've already gone over this in a couple other videos. It was not that surprising that TCU would lose that game. What is more surprising to me is that people are crediting the offense of Colorado and forgetting about the terrible defense. But anyway, I've already covered that in other videos. But there's another reason why the Cinderella story, the out of nowhere victory story, is not quite as surprising. And so what I want to do is I'm going to remind you of a few games here you may have forgotten about. These are games where unranked teams beat teams they were never supposed to win at the start of a season, win against at the start of the season. For example, in 2007, Appalachian State versus Michigan. We'll just stop right there for a moment. When was the last time you heard Appalachian State? Well, that's right, back in 2007. Why? Well, because in one of the most memorable upsets in college football history, Division I AA Appalachian State defeated the number 5 ranked Michigan Wolverines 34-32. The game took place in Ann Arbor at Michigan's home stadium, making the loss even more devastating for the Wolverines. In 2016, the Houston Cougars versus Oklahoma. The Houston Cougars began the 2016 season unranked, but managed to defeat the number 3 Oklahoma Sooners 33-23. 2009, Boise State versus Oregon. Boise State was unranked going into the 2009 season opener against the number 16 Oregon Ducks. I could talk about Northwestern in the 90s. I just want to be clear about something. The idea that an unranked team out of nowhere beats a ranked opponent in game number 1, in the last 20 years or so, it's happened a half a dozen times. Furthermore, during the regular season, sorry about the siren, hold on. That must be headed to Lincoln to pick up some Nebraska players having a panic attack, an anxiety attack about the game tomorrow. They're so scared of Colorado. All right, now that's gone. Back to what I was saying. If you look back over the last 20 years, you'll see that many times unranked teams beat ranked opponents, and not just to start the season, but during the regular season. It's why, by the way, the term Cinderella story is a thing in sports, because it happened before Deion. It happened before Colorado. This is not something that new. It's something that's happened many times and will also happen other times this year. Maybe Nebraska will beat Colorado tomorrow, and that'll be interesting because Nebraska's unranked and Colorado's ranked. supposedly going to win the game. So maybe it'll happen all over again tomorrow. And for all the reasons I've talked about, the hype is way overdone. It's ridiculous. All that can be true. And it doesn't mean he can't be a good coach at Colorado. It doesn't mean he can't be a good motivator of young men. It doesn't mean that his sons aren't going to be fantastic players. And in the case of Shedeur, a Heisman Trophy candidate, absolutely. All of those things can be true. But the hype of Deion changing the face of college football, a winner no matter where he went, and everyone being against him and no one believing in him and all that, those stories just aren't true. The truth is Deion's just a man like you and me, no better, no worse. He's got a gift for gab, and as of 2023, game number 1, his Colorado Buffaloes beat an overrated TCU team in a game that may or may not be a precursor for the rest of the year, but isn't going to have Deion Sanders rewriting all of college football history starting in 2024. As always, if you're a Nebraska fan, go Big Red, and I'll see you next video.